Welcome to Overeducated and Underemployed. I am really excited to bring you this episode this week. We've got Sam Lipkin from Flagpole Magazine and Volumes Hip Hop, and we had a really great conversation. She has a really cool story. I can't wait for you to hear it. I hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving, is spending time with people that mean something to them. I'm really thankful for a lot this year. And I really just want here to thank everybody that's been a part of this podcast this year. I have gotten to talk to some people that I never would have imagined. And I've gotten some amazing stories, and I'm really thankful that I've been able to share those with y'all. We got a lot more coming. Next week, we've got John Neff from Japan Cakes and, of course, the Drive-By Truckers. And then in 2 weeks, we've got Jim Kimo West, who was just nominated for more Grammy Awards. He's got a Grammy already for his slack key guitar work, but he's most famous for being the guitar player for Weird Al Yankovic for the last 40 years. We had a really great conversation. His story's really amazing. Thanks for listening, y'all. I really appreciate y'all being a part of this. Hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Here's my interview with Sam Lipkin. Travel safe. I'm here with Sam Lipkin. She is the editing coordinator at Flagpole Magazine, as well as creator with Volumes Hip Hop. Are you still with them?
Yeah, I own. That's mine.
Yours. Okay.
Mine.
Awesome. Okay, so
90% of Volumes is me, actually.
Awesome.
So.
I have used y'all as a resource before, like at AthFest.
Oh, I love that.
Your hip hop calendar was very useful, but I didn't realize how closely tied to that, which is why I have you here to find out all of the things that you do. And I'm going to start with the first question I ask everybody, which is, what's the first song that you remember loving as a kid?
Interesting. The first song I remember loving, I would definitely say it would have to have been a Pink Floyd song.
Yeah.
So I actually, very young, I had, as a toddler, I was at my aunt and uncle's house and accidentally came in while they were watching The Wall.
Oh, wow.
And I was fascinated.
That's
I was
intense.
enthralled by this. And then I would beg to watch whatever that movie was. And I just had a really, obviously inappropriate for such a young child, but whatever it was about it.
But in kind of a unique way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just really heavy and intense. It's not like it's inappropriate in the way that the South Park movie is or something like that. It's
most of what is inappropriate is going to go over your head.
Yeah.
But because of that, I feel like it probably was The Wall Part 2 or something like that was probably my first favorite song, just because it played on the radio all the time. And I definitely had a Pink Floyd connection.
What's so interesting is I wouldn't say it's universal, but it's super common for that memory to be tied to a movie for people.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
I've Mary was talking about the Big Chill soundtrack. I don't think she wasn't the movie, but the soundtrack was something that J. Roddy Walston was on here, and he told me that it was Twist and Shout watching Ferris Bueller.
Okay.
So it's really interesting how that seems to be a very common thing.
So tied to the visual, it's got to be something with just how young we are and how memories form.
Yeah, when I do
more, I don't know.
Think of movies a lot when I hear certain songs, right?
Yeah.
There's certain songs that get very tied to scenes. I think Twist and Shout's a great example of that. And then Pink Floyd's a whole other level. Because they're intentionally making this visual experience.
One of my favorite soundtracks when I was a kid was the Armageddon soundtrack.
Oh, yeah.
And my parents had that CD, and we would listen to it all the time in the car. And I still just think of that as a great example of great movie, amazing soundtrack.
So where did it go from there? What did you grow up listening to?
A lot of classic rock for sure. So I would say up till middle school, very into classic rock. A lot of times through video games, I found
Nice.
like 9 Inch Nails and Ozzy, and it was so funny because and Rob Zombie, and 8 years old telling my dad like, "Oh, this song in my game is so cool," and my dad would be like, "I guess it's time. Here's my CD. Go
Yeah,
for it. Take
yeah.
a listen." So my parents weren't really too concerned with what I was listening to and things
Yeah.
like that. So a lot of that, and then
And you grew up in the age of like parental advisory stickers and all that
for
too.
sure.
So they probably knew when you were listening to stuff that
Yeah. I will say in 6th grade is when I started riding the bus. So I would get up early in the morning and watch all the MTV music videos. And that was my first exposure to things other than what my parents listened to. And my dad got upset with my grandmother because I got my grandmother to take me to a music store, Sam Goodies, actually.
I worked at a Sam Goody
Really?
for several
Yeah.
years. Yeah.
My grandmother took me to the Sam Goodies, and I bought the first Gorillaz CD, and it had a
Okay.
parental advisory sticker on it, and I brought
Yeah.
it home. And just because my dad had no idea what it was, he was like upset with her. "Do you know what this means?" And he's like, "What are you listening to?" It blew
So was
over
that
really
kind of
quick.
like was that one of your first like forays into hip hop? Because like, Dan the Automator's all over
Yes.
that, and
Yes, I will say
I think like early Gorillaz especially is like very hip
it's
hop
very
and
hip-hop heavy.
rooted.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I would say that was my first exposure to there's all these things on the radio and nothing really clicked with me.
Mhm.
And I was really into Gorillaz. I still am.
Yeah.
And that was definitely my first exposure to some of the more lyrical hip hop.
Yeah.
But I grew up in North Georgia, extremely predominantly white, very conservative.
Mhm.
I just didn't have a lot of exposure to
Like a smaller
hip-hop.
town.
Very small town. I didn't have exposure to hip hop that wasn't just what was on the radio, and I
Right.
wasn't
Yeah.
into that.
Me neither. No, I got really
Yeah.
into the more underground stuff in
Yeah.
the early 2000s and mid 2000s. And a lot of that stuff was like even side projects of people that were affiliated, like working with the
Okay.
Gorillaz and stuff like
Mhm.
that. Like Tron 3030 comes to
Yeah,
mind,
yeah.
or like Black Star, like Most Def and Tully, which
You're right.
was like mainstream, but even that
Mhm.
record was not. I also can really relate to the video game thing.
Mhm.
I actually had an early episode of this podcast where I just rambled about video games and music for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Because I really think, and maybe ties back to the thing with movies too, is like there's something
Right.
about music being tied to an experience. And when you're watching a movie, that's an experience. But when you're playing a game, like that's like very interactive and
Yeah.
very. I never got into club music really,
Mhm.
but then I started playing like Beat Saber, and now I'm like into some of that
Yeah.
stuff because of the experience I had
Yeah.
listening to it. Like, what are some of the examples of like video game music that you were getting into as a kid, or that really called to you? Because I think that's such an interesting kind of.
Yeah, and it's the ones I already named a little. Like my dad had this PlayStation 1 game called Sled Storm,
Okay.
and that's where I first heard Rob Zombie's Dragula. And I found in the settings where you could pick the songs that were playing, and I would just play that over and over again. Playing Midnight Club 3 on the PS2 was where I heard The Hand That Feeds by 9 Inch Nails.
Yeah.
So that got me really into 9 Inch Nails.
That record was like their like big comeback after a while. Like I felt, was that With Teeth?
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, that record is one of my favorite 9 Inch Nails records. Like it's
really
like
good.
A good entry point to 9 Inch Nails for people like that are a little younger.
For sure.
Because I get the impression, I think we're about the same age. I'm 39. I think you're probably a little younger than me. Yeah, I was like, I think you're younger than me, but a lot of the people I've interviewed are older than me.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's interesting. And I think like an older millennial like me relates to both like Gen X in some aspects, and then also like solidly millennial people like yourself.
Mm-hmm. It's an in-between.
Because I still remember a time without the internet, but I also had it young enough to where it was never like, this is foreign to me. And video games, I think, is something like that's a dividing thing where like a lot of people that are older than me, they might have played games or whatever, but it's like, oh yeah, I really liked Pac-Man, or it's like one or two games, and it didn't really carry over into it. I'm like millennials, like we stay gamers.
Absolutely. And I just happened to grow up in a gamer household where my parents are very young, and both of my parents play video games.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like video games are bad for you or why are you playing that? It was a communal thing in my house. And I also played a lot of strategy and RPG games that were my parents saw as a little bit more good for your brain.
Yeah.
You're using your brain in logical ways. You're coming up with strategy. You're having to think through things. I wasn't into the shooters and stuff.
Not me either, really. I was really into like games like Civilization was a big one for me.
Sure. Yeah.
And the music, that game introduces you into a lot of like really amazing, like world-class classical music and things like that too. Yeah, and I think Rob Zombie's Dracula for me, I heard that on the Matrix soundtrack.
Okay.
But similar, like like it was tied to this thing that was bigger than just the song.
Yeah.
So at what point are you a musician? Do you play music at all?
No.
Me neither. I've tried.
Yeah.
I'm a comedian and a historian, philosopher, but I sing in a choir. That's about it. Like community choir. I think that all comedians are usually like failed rock stars.
That's so funny.
And then also a lot of rock stars want to be comedians.
Yeah.
It's like the grass is always, we're all miserable and the grass is always greener a little bit.
It's a creative outlet, and it tends to stem from a same source a lot of times.
I think so too.
Inside you.
Yeah.
So
that darkness. Yeah.
That makes sense.
So you're a writer.
Yeah.
But would you consider yourself have you ever done any comedy or anything? Is that anything you've ever done?
I've thought about it before. So I've always been a writer. That's always been my thing. I was like, as soon as I could form sentences, I would write stories about me and my cat. And I was like,
let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
What are some of the earliest things you remember writing about? You and your cat story. Was it fiction typically?
I definitely was probably in first grade writing my own little mystery stories where me and my cat were solving mysteries in the neighborhood, because that's what all young people. Who was the
sidekick?
The cat.
The cat. You were the lead character. Okay.
I was running things.
That's good. Yeah, I feel like if like in first grade you're writing and you're not even the lead character,
there's more going on there.
I'm like, I'm a little worried about you.
On the topic of being worried about me, it was in third grade that I found Edgar Allan Poe, and that's where I decided
that's a terrible time.
That's what I wanted. Yeah, that's where I started writing poetry, and I was just fascinated with him. I loved him very much. I still do.
Well, what was it at such a young age, though? I think there's a million reasons to love Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah.
And that's not what I'm at. But what do you think was appealing to you at such a young age?
Yeah.
Because that's not typical.
No.
I feel like middle school is when
people get
into people get into the goth phase.
Right.
Middle school. But
I've been since I came out of the womb, I've been angsty and sad and all of those things. But I don't know. My family was very transparent with a lot of things that happened, and there's a lot of things that I was probably aware of very young.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to say this without tooting my own horn, but I was a very intellectual child. Mm-hmm. And I read a lot.
You were reading and writing a lot.
Yeah, I was reading and writing a lot. I was really into watching documentaries, even at a very young age. Nonfiction, I was super into it.
I loved Ken Burns as a kid too. Like it was weird. Like the baseball documentary series, like I was really into, and the jazz one too.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I just had this interest in. I don't know. I just always had this interest in the unexplained, but also diving deeper into humanity, knowing quite young that there were a lot of dark things that happened. I think that was always interesting to me. And my parents are both huge horror fans.
Gotcha.
And I am too. A lifelong horror fan.
Yeah.
I've always watched those things. So I think just very young, I was just trying to process. I had a lot of emotions that I didn't know how to communicate. I've always been a little socially awkward, a little odd. And growing up, I had a very hard time relating to others. And so reading and writing made sense to me.
Yeah.
Reading someone's feelings and writing my own, that made sense to me. Much more than being like weirdly having the verbal words for it. So Edgar Allan Poe was super appealing at that time that I don't think that I knew. That opened that door for me.
Have you ever heard MC Lars rap about Edgar Allan Poe?
No.
I'll send it to you later.
Yeah,
it's
send
fantastic.
it to me.
Your world's colliding right there.
Yeah.
And he calls it laptop rap.
Okay.
And I actually, oddly enough, because we're in Athens right now, I saw him open for Cindy Wilson from B-52s one time.
Okay, cool. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, MC Lars, shout out. He's awesome. But I think he's actually working on an entire album about Edgar Allan Poe now.
Oh.
He had one song back in the day, but I like something in the back. I'll hook you up with that. Yeah, I think that's right up your alley.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where that kind of, I think you put it really well, like this kind of struggle to relate with others. So we, instead of more traditional forms of communication, people write songs, people write stories, people write jokes. I realized that for a long time, like that if I didn't put like a funny spin on what I was saying, it came across as just like rude. Because I'm neurodivergent and things like that. So it's like I'm just straightforward and matter of fact about a lot of things.
I think that I do that as well.
And then also like having that outlet though, and I think maybe you can talk about this, having that outlet made a lot of that other stuff better. So have there been periods in your life where you stopped writing?
Absolutely.
What happens?
It's a struggle. Yeah, it's a struggle. And it's something that I think there's a lot of people that come to these creative outlets to deal with mental health in some way, whatever it is that you deal with, that it's not always the case, but it has been for me. And I have people close to me that it's the case for, where when your mental health gets better, that outlet struggles. Like you don't, whether you don't need it or you're just not in that mindset. And that's happened for me off and on. So it's been when I'm in a better place, I don't feel that need to write. And I tend to not think about it on a personal creative writing level.
Yeah.
And
no, that makes sense to me. I think I experienced something, it's not the opposite, but it's almost like the flip side of that, where the more I'm writing comedy or the more I'm doing these types of things, the better I'm feeling.
Okay.
So if I don't do these things, like, that's when I start to feel like shit.
Which I know a lot of people like that too.
So that's what I'm wondering is like when you go through these periods where you're feeling better, maybe your creative outlets are struggling, does it kind of start to catch up to you eventually, where if you're not putting some of that angst or whatever into that medium?
Definitely. And in some way it almost feels like there's a piece of you that you've left behind or you're not nurturing, or because writing has been such a strong part of my identity, I think, my whole life. And I will say for me, I think all of it's gotten a little better since I have reached a point in my career where writing is my career. So again, when I set aside my personal writing for too long, that doesn't feel good, because again, it feels like I'm not in touch with a piece of myself, not taking care of myself, because that's my outlet. But I'm always writing, which feels good. So I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense actually. And it leads really nicely into the next question I wanted to ask you, which is like, how did you start to, you're young, you're writing a lot to deal with your emotions and the angst, and you get into Edgar Allan Poe. And at what point did you decide that you wanted to make writing your profession?
Yeah, I think all through grade school, trying to decide what to go to college for, it was a big conflict because that question of if you could do anything and not worry about money, what do you want to do? I would love to be a novelist, just write full time. But there's parental pressures, there's societal pressures, like, oh,
You
I
like
gotta
want to
make
eat?
money. Yeah. I like food. I like to travel and go to concerts. So what do I do? And
Capitalism's a bitch.
yeah. And so I struggled. My pathway back, I guess I always knew that writing and specifically journalism was what I was supposed to do. And I fought it, and I took a very circular route to get back to it. Trying
Did
to
you
do
like
other
have
things.
like backup plans or something like that, or?
I don't know. I feel like I always had these ideas that just, I don't know. I don't know that I had a concrete backup plan. I had things that I was okay with doing.
Gotcha.
And I just don't know that they ever rounded out. And I guess the easiest way to make sense of it is in high school, I was the co-editor-in-chief of my school newspaper.
Okay.
I was really into journalism. Everyone was telling me journalism was going to die. So going into college, I went for English because I was like, there's a lot of things I can do under that. And it's still, I'm very good at this. I'll do English. And in college, I thought I was going to get my doctorate and teach college. So I actually double majored in English and classical culture.
Okay.
And towards the end of college, I was almost there. And my advisor was like, it is a long shot that you're ever going to be able to make enough money as a college professor to pay back all these student loans to get there in the first place.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is what I was trying to avoid the whole time. So I get out of college not knowing what I'm going to do, but knowing that digital marketing is a hot topic and a lot of people want digital marketers and they need people that can write. So eventually I found my way into that position and I worked for a big company
Doing digital marketing.
And I wasn't there very long before. I did extremely well there. I got a promotion in a year and everything. And the company was a really bad fit for me. My mental health suffered a lot.
But your writing was great.
And the writing never better. Writing never better. Mental health tanked. And so I saved up enough money to quit and take care of myself for a little while because it was really bad.
Yeah.
I was in a really bad place. And
but I bet you walked away with a lot of skills from that job that you ended up like using in doing things like Volumes Hip Hop.
Absolutely.
Flagpole, yeah.
Absolutely. So that's the roundabout pathway to where
I did some digital
up.
Marketing for a while too.
Yeah.
So
It's hard not. Yeah. If you've got those kind of skill sets, everyone's hiring for it and you can make some decent money. So
Yeah. I was with a startup for a while and I was an archivist for a marketing firm, state-run marketing firm at one point. So I wasn't really doing the marketing, but I was surrounded by it and absorbed it all. Yeah. And then started working for a startup and did digital marketing with them. And I definitely use a lot of those skills now in like, promoting the podcast or the people that I have on it, promoting their stuff when it comes out. And
it was definitely an invaluable experience where those marketing skills are so important. I have absolutely used them.
And I guess the reason I'm like mentioning that is because I feel like even though it was a bad fit for you, the experience ended up being something that probably led to you starting Volumes Hip Hop and things like that.
Volumes actually started before this.
Okay. So give me a little bit about the history of Volumes Hip Hop then.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sorry. It's hard to
it's fine.
Keep my paths in line.
That is literally the format of this podcast.
Yeah.
Is we like follow a thread for a little while and then we go back and then we follow it. Maybe we get a little too far down the exactly. So let's talk about Volumes hip hop then, and maybe that'll fill in some gaps.
I think that it will fill in the gaps. So I have always loved music so much and found a way into my friend circles, being musicians and things like that.
When I just realized you started that in like 2013?
2017.
2017, okay.
It was 2017.
Okay.
Not quite that long ago. So
8 years is still.
Oh yeah, at this point it has been. At this point it has been. I went to UGA. I said I went to college, but I guess I never clarified that I went to UGA. I graduated in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't know what I was doing. That's the point where I graduated college and I was like, now what? Having a very hard time getting a job in any kind of field I thought I fit. So I was just working to pay the bills. My best friend is Trevi of Trevi and the Enemy, a hip hop artist. So Trevor and I found a group of friends to move in with, and Trevor is a hip hop artist, and we just found this cool collective of hip hop musicians and fans and engineers and stuff in the community. So we moved in with them. I was doing my thing, very depressed that I was not working any kind of job I went to school for. And I was already going to all the hip hop shows. We had studios in our house. I already was getting to know everybody. And one of our good friends said what the hip hop scene really needed was its own zine or coverage, because Red and Black, Banner Herald, Flagpole, no one was really covering the scene. They maybe had some cherry-picked, palatable hip-hop artists.
Yeah, I remember that being the case. Like, I came to AthFest in like 2016, and I remember that being the case. Like, it was there was some representation there, but it wasn't not nearly as much as there is now.
Yeah.
And it was a lot more difficult to navigate it too, especially as somebody who coming from out of town, not knowing the scene. Like, I had no idea who was playing what.
Yeah, it's complicated. There's so much with the culture, because hip hop is a culture, and there's so much where, from my perspective, a lot of what was happening was the hip hop culture in the scene has a distrust, a understandable distrust. So they're not necessarily reaching out to Flagpole or whatever. So and Flagpole's only covering them in a way that they feel is inauthentic to the movement, but Flagpole doesn't know what's actually going on either. There's a little bit of a, how does someone know if you don't tell them? But if you don't trust them, do you really trust them with your story and your culture?
Because then they might treat it like they're a tourist and not.
So it's understandable. It's entirely understandable.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying exactly. Yeah.
But at that point, I was like, I like to get active. I like to be involved. Like, you need fans, right, to make things work and to sell out venues and stuff like that. But I just wanted to be a little bit more hands-on. And I was like, a zine is something I can do. So I was just really burnt out and distressed from working jobs to pay the bills that weren't doing anything for my career. I kept being told by companies, you don't have any experience, you just have degrees. So I was like, I'm just gonna make Volumes hip hop and start a monthly hip hop zine covering the hip hop scene.
Was it in print?
It was in print. So the January 2017 was the first zine that was printed. So for a year, Volumes hip hop was a monthly printed zine that I walked around Athens and put out everywhere with a calendar of events. It had a list of people, like if you need a videographer, photographers, engineers. It had contact information. It had stories in it, things like that. And I was just getting to know everybody in the scene, and I was at everything, that it naturally progressed into putting together shows.
Yeah.
So after the first year of Volumes, the zine was just honestly too expensive to keep printing. It was very hard for me to secure advertising or sponsors or things like that. So it went to being online only.
Mm-hmm.
So for a long time, I still covered the hip hop scene in a media and a press capacity online, but I got way more into doing shows.
Gotcha.
And so I did shows, I've put together multiple festivals, and that's really what Volumes developed into. So I was a few years into Volumes before I got like that digital marketing job.
Gotcha.
And it helped my resume. That was the point of Volumes at first, was I wanted to be involved in the scene with my friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't get a job to show people I had the experience to get a better job. So I was like, I'm going to create what I want to do and show people that I'm able to do it. And Volumes got me the digital marketing job. And from all of that experience, eventually that's how I came to Flagpole. Flagpole already knew who I was because I had been doing my thing with my zine around town. So they were like, we already know who you are and what you're doing.
And that leads me to this interesting dynamic that you touched on earlier, where there used to be this distrust between the hip hop community and some of the more, at the time, not mainstream in like the traditional sense, but established independent media in Athens. What were some of the things that you did to bridge that gap, repair that? And did it happen after you came to Flagpole, or was that something you were actively doing as part of Volumes Hip Hop?
Yeah, I think it's something I was actively doing as part of Volumes. It's hard for me to speak with full confidence that I know this is exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. I think introducing...
All you can do is give your...
Right. From my perspective, introducing the zine introduces a little bit of competition into the market, naturally, of course. And I think that there's just a lot that people didn't know. And my personal mission was everyone's stories that I was sharing, just proving to them that they could trust me. And through word of mouth and other people reading what I wrote, they were like, I want you to write about me. And things just changing, I think things changing after kind of everything we went through in 2020 and Black Lives Matter. I think that the local publications started taking hip hop culture as something that needed to be represented and represented with care, and maybe not just how it had been represented previously. Right. And there's new people that were put into place. After the pandemic, Andrew Shear at Banner Herald became like the culture editor and writer. And he goes back in Athens to having hip hop ties. He'd been in punk bands and stuff, and he has hip hop ties to a lot of the OGs. So Andrew brought a lot of that organically to the Banner Herald. And as soon as I came to Flagpole, it was just like, we know you're the hip hop girl. If there's anything hip hop related, first of all, you tell us what is relevant to be covered. And if a story comes through, you write it.
That's what I was thinking about too, was like, not only were you introducing some competition, but you were introducing a like legitimate source of information for the scene that I think like it just inherently repaired some of the mistrust, because all of a sudden Flagpole doesn't have to rely on the community trusting them. They just have to read your zine.
Yeah.
And then they have a source of information to be able to cover that stuff with some credibility, you know what I mean? Even if it's just like adding things to their show calendars. And I think like that, just opening the doors of communication in a very public way.
Yeah. And I have always and still open to meeting up with people and stuff and just telling them how to get press and what to do. Because there's just a lot of people that had no idea. So that's been along the way, showing people that their stories can be told in a genuine and safe way, built trust there to where other people were interested in having their stories told. But then people are like, so how do I get in touch with these? Kind of sparking that interest and showing that there's value in them reaching out,
Right.
which is so, from the other side, as like someone in the press, there are so many people reaching out and there's so much going on all the time. We don't just know what's happening everywhere.
Yeah.
Like the number one way for us to know what you're doing is to tell us.
Well, and the reverse of that is, for me, people will be like, how did you get X or Y on your podcast? And I'm like, I just asked them. And the worst they're going to do is ignore me. I would rather, that's worse than saying no, personally. Like, saying no is fine.
But at least you tried.
Yeah.
IndieCon at the beginning of the month is something that AthFactor and Game Gang in town brought back. They used to do like a indie conference, and they just brought it back at the beginning of this month. And I
saw some stuff about it.
Yeah. I did a little talk on how to get press. And honestly, my number one thing is being easy to work with.
I actually saw that and was like, I really wish I could have been. So we should talk a little. Maybe you can give me the like cliff notes after this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, in fact, I would say, so Flagpole Magazine is probably my number one source of FOMO. I just read it from Florida and I'm like, all this great stuff.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you found really challenging about that position when you first came on board?
I think coming on board, I felt very comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that I felt very comfortable. It's an extremely small staff.
Yeah.
If anything, the most challenging part was at the point that I came on, everyone had been there for, I think that our front desk had been there for 3 or 4 years. Everyone else had been there for 8, 10, 15, 20.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a very established staff.
Yeah.
So coming in new, everyone was open to hearing like new ideas, or everyone else had been there for so long. But at the same time, trying to integrate myself into finding those lines of bringing a breath of fresh air, but not tipping the boat.
Yeah.
And the things that are being done because they work.
And they have reasons that you might not be aware of.
There's so many reasons, and you find out why things have been done a certain way when you try to do it different and fall on your face. That's why. You know? And the readers, the Flagpole has such a long-term readership with a lot of people that there's things that, of course, they want to know what's going on in town, and new things are fun, but then you go too far from the established paper and people are going to be upset because it's not what they used to read or things like that. So it's a balance. Anything that's been established for a long time, I think, is a balance of keeping it fresh and new, not upsetting the foundation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to ask you about something that you mentioned early on, and that was when you were in college, so many people were talking about how journalism was dying.
Yeah.
Has it? Were they right?
Man, I don't think so. So
okay.
I think it's complicated because, of course, the recent kind of shaking news was that the AJC is not printing a physical paper anymore. So you hear that and it's, traditional journalism is out the door.
I think, is a different thing than journalism.
For sure.
I think print media is dying. But
for
journalism, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So print media, in some ways, you see where a lot of people are cutting that because it's just not making sense for the budget, and you could say that. But we distribute papers.
Yeah.
Like at Flagpole.
No, I've got copies of Flagpole in my room. Yeah.
People want the physicals. People pick them up.
I meant to ask you to bring a couple of the latest ones to show. But
I should have.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I'll put pictures of them up on the video.
Yeah. People call and come pick up papers. We have papers that we distribute that we like, people that are on our list where we send them out all over the country. People that are still want to know about home. I know you said you look from Florida, you look
Yeah.
at what's going on and
Yeah.
have FOMO. So
That could
print
be your new
media,
tagline, by the way.
that's
like serving FOMO nationwide.
I love that. Yeah, exactly. Rumpus will be the biggest FOMO for a little while.
I didn't miss out on that
yeah,
one.
you didn't miss out. No, you came for that one. So that's where I think that print media is complicated. And that's, if I was anywhere but Flagpole, I might be able to say differently. Journalism in general, though, also feels complicated because there's always a need to know what's going on. But people are
and like the
becoming so
truth
mistrustful.
too, right?
Yeah.
In this age of misinformation,
Yes.
do you think that print media can like help set apart certain, I don't know, I don't want authority, maybe like things that have that are printed, maybe have somewhat more, maybe not
the
like
thing
actual,
about
but just perceived authority.
things that are printed can't be edited and changed. So I think that's what makes it interesting, because everything online
Can be
can
redacted.
change, it can be altered, it can be updated, redacted, whatever. On one hand, the updating is nice because you would like to assume that you're getting the most up-to-date, recent information, that you're on top of the news, but things can be removed. You can read something and go back later and it's not the same story that you read.
And as a historian, like one of our like primary sources is not what people are saying about it in an updated format, but the newspaper said about it that day.
Yes. I think that is very important for archival reasons, and just being able to go back and follow the story and how people were reacting, because that tells us a lot culturally. And obviously we are in a lot of cultural upheaval, and the fact that there's not really a line to follow, I don't know, it's very complicated. I don't know if what I'm trying to say.
No, I think I think the first thing fascism kills is the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just media, so it's just hard to find the straight facts in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I know that it's subscription based, but there are some news filtering like applications and things that you can put in your browser that when you're looking at stories and Googling things, that it will actually break down for you.
Grounded is a really good source for that.
Okay, what it is?
That's one of them.
Okay.
Where they break down what publications are covering certain stories, so you can even see who's covering it more,
or like Republican versus Democrat, and how it's being covered.
Exactly.
And it's hard to tell people to go spend money on that when people are struggling to buy groceries right now. But we're getting into a point when it comes to news and media that I don't know what to believe without tools like that.
What are some of the things that, because Flagpole doesn't just cover art and culture. So what are some of the ways that you work to maintain your own like journalistic integrity?
And I will say the news side is something that I personally am not.
You don't really mess with that.
I don't really mess with too much.
Well,
it's a conversation. It has to be a conversation. And sometimes it's a conversation with the entire staff, what we're covering, how we're covering it, and trying to make sure that it's the facts. And we are a small team. And it's also not a secret that Flagpole, we are independent. We're one of the very few independent alt weeklies left in the nation. We own ourselves. We can do whatever we want, which I love. I appreciate that. But we're also liberal leaning. And so sometimes you can read that slant in things. But I think we do strive to put out the facts, not jump on things based on hearsay, things like that. The best thing you can do is always refer to sources. And I know our news editor, Blake, does a good job of identifying where all the information comes from.
Gotcha.
So you can go back and do your own research.
Yeah.
Because I always encourage everyone, go do your own research too.
The problem is we didn't teach a lot of these people how to do research. That's the problem that we're running into now, I think. So where do you see all of this going for you personally? What are your do you have goals, or do you just do what you have the tools for in front of you at the moment? Because I don't really necessarily operate with goals. I'm just like, here's what I got. I'm going to do something with it.
Yeah, that has changed entirely for me. So I'm a very anxious person, and I'm a planner. Everything in my life, I like plans, I like routines, things like that. And
those are coping. Those are very strong coping skills for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And growing up, everything, especially with my parents, everything was goals. And growing up, going through college, everything was, here's my plan, here's my goals. Getting out of college was like, here's my plans, here's my goals. And obviously through my story, it just never really panned out the way that I planned. And I was a very strong goal setter. And I think, honestly, that period that I talked about where I quit my digital marketing job and was struggling a lot mentally, it was at that point that I realized, for me personally, focusing too much on the future, I was not taking care of myself in the present. And it was almost excusing my anxiety by being like, we don't have to worry about the steps we're taking if we don't have a goal in the first place, or like what we're trying to get there. And I started looking at it differently. And right now, currently, I think having that experience and how wild the news is every day and the current situation, I don't know how to set goals for myself anymore. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Like you said, that making the best of the present with the tools I have available, and just knowing that if I'm making the best of every day, I gotta be on the right path. I think that's,
Hey, the cure to FOMO is YOLO.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's hard for me. I'm a big FOMO person. FOMO hits me hard. YOLO is hard sometimes to live by. But yeah, I think that's the place I'm at. Yeah.
Sam, thank you so much for being here. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you feel like you want to make sure that we know about?
Yeah. This has been a really great conversation. Yeah, I think that we've really covered things.
Cool.
I will clarify that I've been the editorial coordinator at Flagpole for a little over 4 years now. And since January, I'm actually the music editor as well.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
Actually the music editor.
Cool. Can we talk a little bit about how your role changed and your duties expanded when that happened this year?
Yeah, sure. So when I came into Flagpole, the editorial team had changed because of COVID, where really through COVID, it was Blake Odd holding down news, and it was Jessica Smith holding down arts and culture and music. And so I came in as the editorial coordinator, as like a bridge between the two, to help take on a lot of the planning, special projects like the guide to Athens, coming in as an extra set of editor eyes, helping put the paper together, knowing that music was my writing strong suit. But I feel like I can write anything just about. But with my connection to Volumes hip hop, it was known when I came in, we wanted to be very careful that Jessica was the music editor. So no one felt there was any bias happening or I was changing things.
Stepping on toes.
But I did a lot of the music writing. I did a lot of the culture writing too, since being editorial coordinator. Over time, I worked very closely with Jessica Smith on the arts and culture and music side of things, and that's a huge chunk of the paper that used to be 2 separate editors.
Mm-hmm.
So I would help her a lot. And at the beginning of the year, she moved on to a new position that's super great for her. And so we were like, we don't have to keep the paper structure like this. It was something that was left over from COVID. So we restructured a little bit.
Well, and you restructured it based on the skill set that the team had.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was exactly that. At that point, everyone decided my connection to volumes was not a concern anymore. I'd been with the paper long enough to have proven myself. Kept a lot of my editorial coordinator duties because I'm really good at organizing things, and picked up music editor as well. And then now we do have an arts and culture coordinator position. So we were able to pull all the pieces of the paper back out again a little bit.
Little do they know, really it's all part of your master plan.
My master plan,
to put
right?
Volumes hip hop into Flagpole.
In the Flagpole. Oh man, that's.
I'll cut that. I don't want to start.
It's all good. I will say, with all the changes, my place at Flagpole better serves what I'm writing about in the music community than Volumes does. It's organic, and I make choices that fit Flagpole.
Yeah.
So Volumes has become much more of just my event production business.
Right. Okay.
So at this point,
it's less of a zine, more of just a production, like more of a production
really moved
company.
Away from the zine press media aspect since I am now at Flagpole.
I will say that that calendar that you put out for AthFest was still very helpful. Like,
thank you. Yeah, I will continue
especially
to do
like people that aren't like super plugged into every aspect of the music scene here. It was really nice to like I wish Porch Fest, like the calendar for that could be a little bit easier to read, because wow. But
yeah, and I will, so just as a product of all the things that I do.
And I don't even know who does that. I'm not trying to call anybody out.
Yeah, for sure. That's understandable. It's something that's talked about a lot.
It's 260 artists this year, though.
Yes.
Like, it was crazy.
So I will say the last 2 years, I have been on the AthFest booking committee, which I have loved being a part of that. And a big part of that is booking the hip hop acts.
This is actually great, because Mary told me about the booking committee yesterday, so now I get to talk to one of you without even realizing.
I was gonna say, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to drag this.
No, you're great.
I've got my hands in all kinds of things.
No, this is perfect. This is perfect. This feeds nicely. So what is the process like with booking for AthFest? I was actually really curious, and she was like, "There's a booking committee."
Yeah, totally. AthFest is a huge undertaking, so Mary does a great job, but everyone's got to be in their lane to make it work.
Yeah. And delegate.
Delegate. So with the booking committee, everyone submits, artists submit, and they submit links and all their info. And then there's a period during which the members of the booking committee go through the spreadsheet and check everyone out and make your own list of priorities, maybes, and then you just have your nose or your backups.
But nobody's nobody really campaigns against people being on. They just have their picks for it.
Yeah, everyone basically, we have our picks for it, unless the only thing I can think of is if someone is, I know that this act is very problematic in some way. It doesn't represent AthFest, or I don't know. It would have to be pretty extreme to be like, I have to let you guys know about this person or band. Otherwise, after we go through looking at the list, we come together as a group with kind of our picks, and Troy Aubrey is the head of it. And Troy always comes with who he's picked for headliners and who he has offers out for, and we fill in the blanks. Is essentially how the booking committee works. And this year it was really lovely because we had an intern who was able to facilitate sending out the contracts. In the past, we've split it up, gotten the contracts back from people. But we do split it up as far as who's contacting who about the initial offers and getting things set.
How do you make sure that the bands that share members don't play at the same time? Because that's got to be like a real concern.
It definitely is, and that's Troy. That's Troy Aubrey.
That's wild. Because like John Neff, who I'm actually going to go talk to this afternoon, he played in 3 different bands at this year's AthFest, and I was just joking with him. We should just call it Neff Fest.
Just Neff.
But that's a real concern. Like I can think of several other examples where people are in multiple bands, and it's a lot to keep track of. It's not just the 100 or so artists that play. It's way more than that.
Yeah, which is you talking about Porch Fest makes Porch Fest and their scheduling really intense. This year was
I can't believe they let people play in more than one Porch Fest.
So this year was my first year being on the Porch Fest committee, and I can't speak to a lot of the decisions. We definitely came together many times to talk through improvements, concerns, and they've done a really great job of adding things like the food truck park and the indie market and indie South market and things like that are really cool. The ever expanding number of acts is a thing that is widely talked about, and I think that there are
at a certain point you spread the people so thin.
You do.
And I haven't been to a Porch Fest. I just logistically, that's just what happens.
It's right. The more acts there are, the more people who are going to end up playing to 2 or 3 people in the lawn. And there's some acts that are always going to draw a crowd of 80 people or more or whatever and spill out into the street. I cannot speak for historic Athens as far as what the future holds. I can't speak on
But they're aware of some of these things that are morphing.
And I think that sometimes talking to a group of people, you can bring up criticisms, but when you have all of these people still willing to sign up, it's hard to justify. Like sometimes it's hard to justify your criticisms, although they're valid.
Right.
I think they're valid criticisms, but if people are still signing up, it's on them. They know what they're signing up for.
It's kind of if like Disney raises their prices, people are still going. We might think it might be tough on the whatever, but
and for the people that
they're not
don't
wrong
go anymore, there's others that are still coming in. That's where I think it's at.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. Make sure you check out Flagpole Magazine. In fact, you have a chance right now to be part of Flagpole Magazine. Their last issue of the year, they take reader-submitted stories and articles and poems and all that kind of thing. You can make a submission right now. That's open for a little bit longer. There's links in the description to the magazine. There's links to Volumes Hip Hop. Stick around, hit that subscribe button. A lot of people are listening without subscribing, and I appreciate it, but we got a lot of cool stuff coming your way. We got John Neff and Jim Kimo West, as I mentioned earlier. And then starting in January, we're going to take a couple weeks off. And then starting in January, we got season 3 kicking off with Tommy Simbaza, who's a comedian and a friend of mine, and Brian Howard from Cracker, and he's played with Kevin Kenny and just countless people. Stick around. We've got a lot coming, and we're just getting started here on Overeducated and Underemployed. Happy Thanksgiving, y'all.